Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. Today we're diving into February 13th, which it turns out is basically the historical equivalent of a Costco sampler tray. Everything is here. Constitutional revolutions? Check. Siege warfare? Check. Scientific breakthroughs? Check. Nuclear detonation, stolen paintings, collapsing empires, collapsing stock markets, collapsing monarchs, well, just about anything that wasn't bolted to the floor. If February 13th had a theme song, it would be Uh-Oh. So let's walk through humanity's greatest hits and greatest flops as performed on this date across centuries. And because this is Klepper's Corner, we'll do it with the appropriate mix of awe, confusion, and soft existential dread. Segment 1, crowns, constitutions, and the fine art of not trusting your monarch. February 13th is a big day for the idea that maybe, just maybe, kings shouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want. On this day in 1689, England basically held the world's earliest HR meeting for monarchy. Parliament looked at William and Mary and said, "You're hired, but here's your contract, your responsibilities, your limitations, and we have a zero-tolerance policy on tyranny." The Declaration of Rights spelled out that kings cannot suspend laws, can't tax people just because they feel like it, and can't keep a standing army unless Parliament says so. This is basically when England upgraded from monarchy 1.0 to constitutional monarchy 2.0, now with fewer arbitrary arrests and more paperwork. Contrast that with February 13th, 1542, when Catherine Howard, teenage queen, political pawn, and cautionary tale, was executed after Henry VIII discovered she had a past. Henry's entire dating history reads like a true crime podcast with musical numbers. His wives were less partners and more seasonal employees. Catherine's execution proves that when you give one man divine power, he will absolutely misuse it, usually before brunch. Then there's 1660, when Charles XI inherited Sweden. At 4. Nothing says responsible governance like handing a toddler the nuclear codes of the 17th century. When he grew up, he centralized power so tightly that Sweden became a well-oiled absolutist state. They fixed the economy, strengthened the army, and proved that, yes, if you take all the toys away from the aristocrats, they cannot throw tantrums and run the government. And in the U.S., February 13th, 1861 saw Abraham Lincoln's election officially certified, while the country was literally dissolving in real time. 7 states had already left. Armed troops guarded Congress because nothing says peaceful transition like soldiers making sure the ballots don't get jump-kicked by secessionists. The machinery of democracy kept running even as half the country was unplugging it. And in 2016, the sudden death of Justice Antonin Scalia ignited one of the most chaotic nomination battles in modern memory, reminding America that you can spend your entire career defining the Constitution, but your absence may define it even more. February 13th, where governance is made, unmade, and occasionally decapitated. Segment 2, humanity's favorite hobby, destroying entire cities. February 13th, 1258, the Mongols sack Baghdad. And sack is putting it gently. This was less hostile takeover and more press the reset button on civilization. The House of Wisdom, the libraries, the scholars, the manuscripts, all erased. It was like someone threw the entire intellectual output of the medieval world into a shredder and said, "Good luck rebuilding algebra." Fast forward to 1945. Dresden. Allied bombers create a firestorm so intense that people suffocated in shelters that remained physically intact. It's one of history's most debated military operations, strategic necessity or civilian punishment. Historians are still fighting about it the way comic book nerds argue over which Batman is best. It's the animated one. We all know this. And then we have 1692's Massacre of Glencoe, where soldiers lived with the McDonald's for 2 weeks, eating their food, sleeping by their fires, before murdering them at dawn. Imagine inviting Airbnb guests into your home and they repay you by burning your house down. It redefined hospitality violations so severely that Scottish law had to invent a new phrase, murder under trust. And the Alamo? Mid-February is when Santa Anna raised the red no quarter flag, the 19th century equivalent of an email subject line reading, "Per my last message, you're doomed." Texian resistance hardened, tempers flared, and both sides realized they weren't fighting over policy anymore. They were fighting over survival. Segment 3. Galileo, Edison, Shockley, and Yeager walk into a bar. Whenever February 13th gets tired of monarchy and warfare, it turns to science. The one domain where humans channel their destructive tendencies into math. Galileo arrives in Rome on February 13th, 1633, to face the Inquisition for saying the Earth goes around the sun, which, in retrospect, is an astronomically reasonable thing to say. But the church responds with, "Have you considered not?" And thus, Galileo becomes the poster child for scientific truth versus institutional feelings. Then in 1880, Thomas Edison observes the Edison effect, electrons zipping across a vacuum from a hot filament to a metal plate. He doesn't fully understand it, but that's never stopped Edison before or since. This little quirk would eventually give birth to vacuum tubes, radio, television, radar, and computers. Basically anything in Best Buy bigger than a toaster. Then February 13th gives us birthdays for two men who shaped the modern world in extremely different ways: William Shockley and Chuck Yeager. Shockley co-invents the transistor, thereby enabling every electronic device you've ever ignored your family with. Later in life, he embraces eugenics, thereby enabling every awkward "we don't claim him" moment in Silicon Valley history. Yeager, meanwhile, punches through the sound barrier in the Bell X-1, the original, literal orange rocket. After that flight, humanity collectively agreed that going faster than sound was cool, and maybe we should try going faster than everything. Without Yeager, we don't get supersonic jets, space programs, or every 12-year-old's dream of becoming a fighter pilot before taxes crush their spirit. Segment 4. France decides to join the nuclear club. Loudly. February 13th, 1960. France detonates its first nuclear bomb, Gerbois Bleu, in the Algerian desert. And because France loves to make an entrance, their first test was bigger than the US, UK, and Soviet inaugural tests combined. It was the nuclear equivalent of showing up to a potluck with a whole roast elephant. The French government celebrated it as a triumph of national pride. Algeria, the place where it actually happened, responded with something closer to, "Hey, what the hell?" Fallout drifted across borders. Soldiers were marched into contaminated zones to observe the effects, which is Cold War slang for "we didn't want to send robots, so you." Nations condemned France, ambassadors were recalled, and the geopolitical fallout lingered long after the radioactive dust settled. And then there's Britannic, the Titanic's younger, allegedly safer sister ship, launched around this time in 1914. She had every safety improvement imaginable, and still sank in 1916 after hitting a mine. A reminder that the universe always gets the final vote, and it usually votes sink. Segment 5. Identity, injustice, and the problem of being human in a group. February 13th isn't just about explosions and kings behaving badly. It's also about social transformation. In 1920, black baseball owners gathered to create the Negro National League, a structure that finally allowed black athletes to control their own contracts, stadiums, and finances. It was economic sovereignty disguised as sports, and it worked. It also led to the paradoxical reality that integration eventually dismantled the very leagues that empowered black communities. Progress has receipts, and history likes to itemize them. Then, in 2008, Australia issued a formal apology to the stolen generations, Indigenous children forcibly removed from their families for decades. It was a landmark moment for national reckoning. But, as always, the apology came without financial reparations, leaving many to wonder whether acknowledgement without restoration is justice or just good optics. And in 2019, North Macedonia officially changed its name to end a decades-long dispute with Greece. If you've ever argued over who gets the last slice of pizza, imagine that feeling multiplied by ancient history, nationalism, and NATO membership. The name change unlocked alliances, trade, diplomacy, proof that sometimes the biggest geopolitical shift in Europe happens because two nations finally agree on what to call a place. Segment 6. Art, markets, and the weird stuff February 13th loves to throw in. Richard Wagner dies on February 13th, 1883. A composer whose music reshaped Western culture while his ideology soured it. Wagner is the historical version of a brilliant chef who also insists on giving every guest a lecture that ruins the meal. His operas remain towering achievements. His worldview remains a darkness classical music still struggles to separate from the art. Then in 2000, the final original Peanuts comic strip runs. The morning after, Charles Schulz passes away. It's strangely poetic. The man who chronicled the quiet anxieties of modern life literally exits alongside his creation. There's no more Charlie Brown waiting for the football. Schulz took the football with him. And in 1994, thieves steal the screen from Norway's National Gallery by climbing a ladder, smashing a window, cutting the painting out of the frame, and leaving a postcard mocking the security. This heist was less Ocean's 11 and more Home Depot special. It took 50 seconds, barely enough time to microwave a burrito, and it triggered a global security reassessment. Finally, in 1997, the Dow Jones crosses 7,000 for the first time, cementing the era of unbounded tech optimism. The 90s market was like a teenager discovering energy drinks for the first time. Unstoppable, jittery, and definitely headed for a crash later. February 13th. Come for the sack of Baghdad, stay for the stock market milestone. In conclusion, February 13th is not a date. It's a cross-section of everything humanity is capable of. Destruction and creation, tyranny and liberation, breakthroughs and breakdowns. It's a highlight reel of our best and worst instincts, laid out across centuries, all whispering the same reminder. History doesn't repeat, but it does remix. And February 13th is one of its most chaotic albums. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and I'll see you next time on Klepper's Corner.